The following is a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club. 20 international chess professionals compete in St. Louis as USChessChamps.com presents the second annual Fall Chess Classic. You are looking live at the St. Louis Chess Club boardroom in the tournament hall, where today questions may be answered as to who will be the champions of Groups A and B. Come on into the studio and join us. Hello, chess fans. My name is Ben Simon, and I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful international master, Eric Rosen. Today, Eric, we have two top players in either section who could win their respective groups with one round to go.
That's right. Dreev leading Group A by 1 point, and Gabuzian leading Group B with 2 points. So if Gabuzian draws or gets any points today, he'll be Group B champion. But we're going to get into the games and see what's going on.
Yeah. First, let's take a look at the standings here in Group A. First of all, so in Group A, Alexei Dreev leads with 1 point. And he could win today. It will probably go into tomorrow. A lot of key games in this matchup. We will take a look. But in Group B, here is the one with more immediate circumstances. Hovhannes Gabuzian with a 2-point lead. Had he scored, or should he score anything in this round, this group is over as far as round 1 goes. We'll still play tomorrow. But as we get into the games, we will realize maybe that is not going to be the case today. Here's the tournament format really quick. We have two 10-player round robins. The time control is 90 minutes for 40 moves, and there's 30 minutes for the remainder of the game after that. 30-second increment from move number 1, and important to note that the players cannot agree to a draw before Black's 30th move to encourage fighting chess. Okay, here's the tournament schedule. Today, we're on the air at 3:30 p.m. Tomorrow, though, everything is different. The games will begin at 11 a.m. Central Time, and you can watch them at USChessChamps.com. Now, we will be on the air with you 2.5 hours after that at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. And hopefully, the key games are still in progress when we come on the air to join you. And reminder, join us all across social media. Facebook, Twitter. We are broadcasting live on YouTube and Twitch as always, and of course USChessChamps.com. Remember to hashtag Fall Chess Classic to join the conversation. Okay, here are the pairings for Group A first of all, our Masters division. Hansen versus Bruzone. That is an important game first of all. More about that later. Hammer versus Sethuraman. Akobian versus Kuzubov. Zierk versus Lenderman, and there's no doubt about it, our key matchup.
That's right. Alexei Dreev leading Group A with 5 out of 8 points, playing Ray Robson, who's had somewhat of a topsy-turvy event, winning some games, losing some games, now at an even score going into the penultimate round. Let's take a look at the current position because a lot has come off the board. I do want to back up to when things got interesting around this point when Dreev played knight to b5, putting a lot of pressure on the c7 pawn with both the knight and the rook. Turns out Black can't actually defend c7 given that there are 2 attackers and 0 defenders. So Ray decided to just snag away the b2 pawn. After knight takes c7, a lot of things were under attack. All of the rooks, almost all of the rooks hanging in this position for both sides. After bishop takes c1, rook takes c1, white was temporarily down the exchange, but clearly winning it back. Going forward here, rook to c8, knight take e6, all of the rooks come off the board, and after bishop takes c1, f take e6, king f1. This brings us to the current position where it's somewhat classic knight versus bishop endgame. White is probably slightly better here, just due to the fact that there are pawns on both sides of the board. Usually the bishop is happier in these situations where it can more easily transfer itself to the king side or queen side if need be. However, I would probably bet my money that this game will be a draw, given that just so much has come off the board. and there are no passed pawns in the position, so I would expect Ray to hold on and get the half point.
Well, and if nothing else, what a draw would give us is at least some excitement for tomorrow, because that would guarantee that Group A is not decided today, because 2 4-point players in Group A are playing each other, and that is Hansen and Bruzon. So one player at least guaranteed to walk out with 4.5 points, 1 point within the leader. So some excitement there. Let's take a look at the pairings in Group B for round number 8. Azarov versus Jacobson. Ashwin versus Mora Diabati. Yu versus Holt. Zierk versus Boros. And our key matchup.
Yeah, Akshat Chandra taking on the most dominant player in Group B thus far, Havanes Gabuzian. Akshat has lost the majority of his games this tournament, being tied for last place with 2 out of 7 going into this round. Gabuzian with 6 out of 7 going into this round, only dropping 2 half points. I do want to take a look at what has happened, because the game is actually over.
Oh my goodness.
And Akshat has has taken down the Group B leader. We see Mike Hummer there resetting the board. Very stunning result, given that Gabuzian has just been on fire this whole event. But nice win for Akshat. If we just take a look at the final few moves played in this game, we see rook to c8. Seems like white is invading via all directions. Queen very well placed on h6. Rook is now pinning the knight on e8. And white is actually currently up a piece in this position too. After rook to c7, bishop h7 was all said and done, given that the king really has no safe place to go. If king f7, there would be queen g6, king f8, and queen g8 mate. And meanwhile, if queen take h7, there would be rook take e8. And black is just going down hard. So it would be great to get Akshat in the studio. We have not had him yet this tournament.
Yeah, in fact, we are going to have him in just a few moments. Before we get to him, let's take a look at what these players are fighting for in this event, because, well, there's a few different things, but the one thing that's universal, the prize money. $22,000 for Group A. First place walks out with $6,000. And in Group B, there's also a very generous $14,000 prize fund, where the champion walks away with $4,000. Eric, I understand we do have Akshat Chandra ready to talk to us, and we'll get him set up in the studio, but let's take a look at a game in the meantime while we have him in here.
Absolutely. I do want to go to the game between Christopher Yu and Conrad Holt, because things are getting really, really crazy. Let's go back and see what exactly happened in this middle game. We have kind of a classic opposite side castling situation. White castled on the queen side, black castled on the king side. So we see white is hoping to go for a king side attack here. Christopher played pawn to f4, pawn b5. And this is a common type of idea for black, to try and sacrifice a pawn and open up the file. Rook to b8 could be played, and there would be 2 half-open files for black to attack with. So the pawn was not taken. Bishop to d3 played, bishop to b7, and now we see just an incredible move by the youngster in this position. I would encourage viewers to pause here and try and find just a sensational move for white. In one moment, we are getting an interview set up with Akshat. And we're actually going to come back to this game. I'll leave it on the hook here, but I do want to welcome Akshat Chandra
Eric,
into the studio. Congratulations on an amazing win today.
Oh, thanks. I don't know if it was amazing, but it feels good to win after a while.
Of course. Take us through the game, because it seemed like you were down on time, and then all of a sudden you were just crashing through with just an amazing attack.
Yeah, it escalated pretty fast. I mean, I had a slight edge, but it was nothing serious, and then he just collapsed pretty fast. So yeah, the opening was, I didn't really expect him to play the Grunfeld, but I did prepare something there. So h4 is pretty aggressive. So d takes c4 is the most principal move, but c6 is very solid as well. He probably wasn't prepared for it.
And is this a line that you've played before, this h4
No,
push?
I've never played it before. This is the first time.
So was this something you kind of have kept in your back pocket for previous games?
Yeah,
or?
I guess so. I
Fair
never really
enough.
got a chance to use it. So yeah, after c6 takes, we've got sort of like an exchange slab with his bishop on g7, and but my pawn's on h4, so that's probably bad for me. If it was on like h3 or h2, it'd be comfortably better for white, but because the pawn's on h4, it's just slightly better. So yeah, knight c6, e3, castle, queen b3, yeah, b6. So yeah, I was out of my preparation here. I probably have looked at this, but I just couldn't remember, so I just started playing natural moves. Rook c1, bishop e7, yeah, bishop e2.
And were you spending a lot of time in the opening? Because it seemed like...
No, I played this pretty fast. So castle I moved pretty fast because those are pretty obvious moves. Yeah, after knight e4 I started thinking because it felt like I'm better, but it's not so easy. I mean, his position's very solid and it's not easy to come up with a good plan here. So I thought queen a3 makes sense, getting out of the way of knight a5, maybe bishop a6 in the future. Knight b5 ideas like I did in the game. Yeah, I was surprised by his next move, h6. But I guess it has some logic. He wants to play g5 and...
Yeah, it seems a bit strange for black to be trying to attack on the king side with your pawn already on h4.
True.
But
maybe he thought that he could exploit it or something. But yeah, I think knight b5 is okay. g5, yeah, I don't think I played it in the best manner now. I'm not sure if bishop c7 is the best move. I was considering other ideas too, like bishop d6 and knight d6, but somehow I couldn't make them quite work. Bishop d6, maybe a6 he can play, like, it's a nasty intermediate move.
if bishop take f8, your queen gets hit.
Yeah. And if I play knight d6...
Oh, knight
knight
d6,
d6, yeah.
in this position?
Yeah, I was calculating like g takes f4, knight takes b7, queen e7. So I can take on e7 and take on f4. I wasn't sure about this endgame though because the d4 pawn's pretty weak. Like he goes knight f5.
It seems like your knight is just very
that also,
stuck too on b7.
It's marooned, yeah. Rook fd1, like rook c8, and like I'll have to give control of the c file. And knight on b7 is stranded. d4 pawn's weak, so even though I'm a pawn up temporarily, it doesn't look so good for white.
So going back to what you did play in the game, bishop to c7.
Yeah.
Seemed like things were getting
I started
very
getting
complicated
optimistic,
here.
but after queen d7, knight e5, take bishop e5, I think he should play bishop c6 here. I missed that initially. Blocking the c file and hitting my knight with a tempo.
Yeah, and
yeah, I wasn't sure what I would play here. Next move, he can even just grab on h4. I mean, I think the computer, I was just checking it outside, said it's still slightly better for white, but I still think it was his best chance. Rook fc8.
he was moving incredibly quickly.
Yeah, he was. He's a very fast player.
The time situation, at some point he had over an hour and you had less than 5 minutes, it seemed like.
No, he was playing at bullet speed. It's quite impressive, actually. So yeah, rook fc8. Okay, I thought hg5 is normal. Yeah, I'm not sure about rook takes c8 because it gives up control of the c file. I mean, his queen recapture was a blunder, but if he takes back with the rook, I'm not sure really if I have much. I mean, I guess he was worried about queen takes a7, but he plays rook c2 and he gets a lot of counterplay. I don't think he's that much worse here, if at all.
Do you think it may have been a mistake for him to just be playing so quickly when things were so
probably.
complex?
But it's probably his style, so
that's true.
He's probably used to it, and he has good results with it as well. I guess he just missed the queen infiltration. I mean, f3 was also very tempting here. I couldn't decide between the two, but I wasn't sure about knight d2, and it's probably still winning somehow, but it requires a bit more calculation. But what I did in the game, bishop takes and queen e7, like I don't even have to calculate. I can just play,
That's a very intuitive move.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I mean, black is under serious pressure. F3 coming.
Exactly.
Knight d6 ideas.
So rook b8, I was surprised by. I think his only move was bishop c6, which is not so obvious at first sight. I think he was going to play it actually. He had his hand over the bishop, then he paused and played rook b8. But yeah, bishop c6. I was calculating f3 here. Knight f6. Knight c7, because knight d6, queen d7, and he gets to trade the queens. So
Yeah, and this is not the type of position you want to have queens come off the board.
For sure. So knight c7, rook b8, rook c1. I thought I'm winning at least a pawn here. For example, queen d7. Wait, just a sec. No, this is correct. Knight takes c6, knight takes c6, yeah.
Okay, because the queen is
Yeah.
overworked and
Yeah.
exploit this pin.
It's a nice tactic. And then the endgame's obviously completely winning. I mean, I'm a pawn up, and I've controlled the only open file, so.
Sure. But that was still probably his best chance.
Exactly. But I can understand why he wouldn't want to play that. Yeah, rook b8, I think it's just elementarily winning now.
And then it was
F3.
just full momentum in your
Exactly,
favor, knight f6,
Knight d6.
knight d6, and yeah, just pure defensive for black.
Yeah, rook d8 is just desperation. I mean, bishop a8 is not exactly the move you want to make, but
It's very true.
I think I was going to play like e4 here and just play e5 next and just
And if pawn take, you're
f takes. Yeah.
just happy to open that file.
Yeah, the f file is it's just devastating.
Very nice. So rook to d8, and
Yeah,
we'll
I
just
was
admire
surprised
that.
by that. I got worried that I missed something, but I was like, okay, no, it's completely winning, of course.
Yeah, we'll just admire the end of the game. Seemed like you were completely crashing through.
Yeah,
and
true. I mean, the
rook
good thing is
entered.
that if worst comes to worst, I can also play bishop a6 and protect the knight. So he's never really getting the piece back.
That's true, yeah,
But obviously, I would prefer to finish it off in a mating attack.
of course. So you just gave the tournament leader his first loss of the event. I know you've had a rough event thus far.
Yeah.
Does it still feel good to kind of have a win towards the end and maybe finish strong?
Yeah, definitely. And he's a very strong player. Like you said, he was undefeated until now. So yeah, it feels good to win this game.
Do you feel like there's some like psychological benefit that there's no real pressure on you going into this game? All the pressure is on him to try and at least clinch a draw to secure first place. Did that
I don't think
help
so.
you
I
at
think
all?
it might be the other way around though, because he's in good form, he's confident, so he's playing freely while I've been playing terribly. The pressure's on me to sort of get a respectable finish. So, okay, I don't think this game meant any less to me than it did to him.
Fair enough. And one more question, because you live in St. Louis. I know you play a lot of these events.
Yeah.
What's next for you after this tournament?
I'm probably going to play the Spice Cup, another St. Louis tournament.
And that starts next week?
Yeah, the 23rd. So that's a strong tournament as well.
Well, best of luck in that, and good luck
Thanks.
tomorrow too. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with more coverage from the 2018 Fall Chess Classic.
A moment comes in chess when you need to test yourself at a different level. Chess 24 Premium offers the tools that you need to reach your maximum potential. From hundreds of interactive video lessons to becoming part of the Chess 24 community. You can analyze with friends or coach your students live. You get 24/7 coverage of chess news and events, access to premium analysis and commentary, and the chance to interact with grandmasters and other top players and coaches. Get advice from the best and even challenge them to a battle. Be the best chess player you can be. It's time to level up your game with Chess 24 Premium membership.
That was an amazing piece of calculation, easily dominating his rivals, winning game after game. The opposition has never been as heated, as fierce in both elite chess tournaments in the world.
Hello and welcome back to Round 8 coverage of the 2018 Fall Chess Classic. Ben Simon here along with International Master Eric Rosen. And during the break, we've had this game in Group B. It's just crazy. Chris Yu is looking really good against Conrad Holt, and this is big news for him.
That's right. I do want to jump to the decisive moment in this game. Christopher unleashed this just amazing move kind of coming out of nowhere. Bishop take h7. Now this is a relatively thematic sacrifice in such positions where it is opposite side castling and the queen can come in very soon to h5. If we see how this plays out, it just looks completely crushing for white after king take h7. The rook can also infiltrate via d7, which was played. And after queen c8, rook hd1, white isn't even going for the immediate queen h5 check. The rooks are just so dominant on the d file, and it was very difficult for black to challenge white at all in this position. Queen h5 is always looming. King to g8 was played, and after rook 1 to d3, we see this looming rook lift, and after bishop to c6, rook h3, and there we have a handshake. Hopefully we'll get Christopher in the studio. So they are just finished very, very quickly. Alshon seems a bit surprised there, just walking in front of the camera.
Right. Now, I don't know, have you mentioned the Norm story here yet?
I don't believe I have, even though Christopher Yu was in last place going into this round with 2 out of 7 points. If he wins his last 2 rounds, he just won this round, so if he wins tomorrow, he will clinch his final IM Norm. And I believe that would make him the youngest international master in the country. So a lot on the line.
Right, and you know, it's not something that we've been thinking about along the way, since he's the bottom seed, and you know he's up against a really, really tough field. But not only does he have that potential to norm tomorrow, but he's playing Gabuzian tomorrow.
That's a huge matchup. Gabuzian going down hard today.
Yes.
Seems like momentum is now in Christopher's favor, but of course, okay, Christopher will be playing for a win tomorrow. I know he has the black pieces, but whenever there's a norm on the line and you're in a must-win situation, you're going to play for a win. You're not going to take that quick draw.
Absolutely. Did you complete your look at how that game ended?
So we should jump to that just real quick, just to have some closure, and then hopefully we'll have Christopher here soon to give us some more in-depth analysis. But we see the rook did lift over to h3. Just a beautiful game by white, given that white has so far sacrificed the bishop on h7. Now the rook on d7. Now white could take the queen, but there is no need for that. Queen h5 is just pretty much unstoppable mate. Queen h8 is looming. Conrad tried one desperate attempt. Bishop to e3 check. King b1. And then queen d1 check. It's almost checkmate, but not quite. Right. For the maybe more beginner players out there, you should realize what to do here for white.
This is just a computer spite check, right? Queen takes d1.
It's a spite check, yeah, just queen take d1, which is actually the only legal move. So white would have to play this. And after rook fd8, the queen returns to h5, and Conrad threw in the towel here, given, okay, there is one more spite check.
Let's finish this game up. We have Chris coming into the studio here, so we'll have him in just a few moments.
All sounds good. Yeah, queen take d1 would just be all but over. I mean, there's rook d8, but then queen take d8. So we will wait for Christopher, but in the meantime, let's check out another game that is still underway. I do want to take a glance at the Rosen Akobian game, because he is up a pawn, and if we look at the current position, bishop h3 is played, keeping white's rook at bay. The rook cannot activate itself via e3, because then there would be a back rank mate with rook c1. So it's Akobian to move here, and it is a question how to potentially make progress with the extra pawn, because for the time being, black's rook is more active. There's ideas of rook to c3, and there's no immediate counterplay for white. This king f8 move was very useful for black, not allowing any potential back rank mate ideas. So Akobian seems to be taking his time in this position. I could imagine something like bishop to d5, perhaps defending b3 in advance. Though this could run into a move like rook to d8, and then it's somewhat of an annoying skewer. If rook e5 is played, then black can start kicking around the white rook, and we could see something like rook h5, and then both bishops are hanging, but after a move like bishop to g4, black should not be having any problems in this position. So Akobian, if he wins this game, he will keep his chances alive to potentially tie for first going into tomorrow. So we will keep an eye on this. But I do want to switch back to the Christopher Yu game because we do have Christopher in the studio. Congratulations on a very quick and very aesthetic win today.
Yeah.
So were you surprised that you were able to take down such a strong player so quickly, or did it just feel natural playing this nice attack?
A little bit, although I did have a game against him a couple months ago that I did take him down quickly mostly because of opening preparation.
Mm-hmm.
He's a pretty predictable player, so I can prepare some surprising stuff. And today I think
yeah, I actually forgot that you did play him in the California State Championship, right? Just back in September?
No, I actually played him at a Norm event.
Norm event.
Norm
okay.
event in our area in
I
Berkeley.
see. And were you white in that game as well?
Yeah.
And so how did that game compare to this game? Was it a similar opening or
Yes,
much different?
Similar opening, a little different because he played bishop b4. Today he played knight f6, but I expected that.
Yeah, always nice to kind of have some expectations of what the opponent will play. And I know the French defense is a pretty expected opening from Conrad. So how far prepared were you in this game?
Maybe 12 or 13 moves, but I remember the ideas farther.
Mm-hmm.
Up to like move 16, I still use some of the idea.
Yeah, I know this is a very thematic position, especially with opposite side castling. A lot of ideas are pretty classic for white, especially going for these kingside sacrifices. So if we reach this position after queen to c7, seemed like the play flowed very nicely for you with knight e5 and then pawn f4. At what point did you feel like he made kind of the crucial mistake?
Maybe allowing bishop takes h7, or maybe b5 may have not been necessary, maybe a6.
Mm-hmm.
And then king b1 I think was my preparation.
Okay, so this is a position that you've studied before.
Yeah, and I studied the bishop takes h7 idea in another variation, but with the king on c1 there was less squares. Bishop b5.
Because with the king on c1, sometimes there's potential counterplay for black.
With the king on b1, I know bishop takes h7 is winning. According to the engine.
Interesting. Okay, so after bishop e7, how long did it take you to calculate all the variations and play bishop take h7 here?
20 minutes or so.
Oh wow! So it's a long time. But of course, if you think it's winning, then makes sense to go for.
I already knew that. So bishop takes h7. I already knew that this was idea from the start. Rook d7. Queen ca, and I actually rook hd1 was my preparation in another line, and here I kind of stopped with my king on b1, but with the king on c1 the position is a little more unclear.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're able to use preparation from very similar position, but then it's all about kind of identifying the differences and maybe the nuances in the variation. Did you see any sort of defense for him in this line?
I thought he should play queen b8 instead of queen ca.
And what would the difference be?
If I play rook hd1 now, I'm not threatening queen h5 and knight takes f7 because of queen takes f4. So something like king b1 is possible.
So maybe king b1 instead of rook hd1?
No, rook hd1 is good. So After rook hd1, there's something like bishop ca. Rook 1 d3, that's it.
Rook 1 d3.
Now wait.
Could you still? I mean, if bishop takes d7, you're just
okay, king
you're
ga.
crushing, right?
Let's say I play rook h3, g6. This is knight. Now knight takes. If knight takes g6, bishop takes d7. Then I think queen h5 is possible. King g7.
And your knight defends f4, which is nice.
Yeah, king g7, queen h6, king f6, knight takes away.
There's even queen g5 check
Queen
here.
g5,
which
yeah, knight e5.
is just made into.
It's not forced though. Maybe black has a better defense. Like bishop c8 is not forced.
Seems like black is always under
it's-
major pressure.
It's unclear. Maybe black has a defense, but from a human standpoint, it's quite difficult to defend this position.
That's very true. Of course, maybe if you turn on the computer, we'll find some miracle defense, but
I just know it didn't with a king on b1. So.
fair enough, yeah. And that's, if we go back to what happened in the game, it seemed like there was little hope after rook ht1 in this variation. It seemed like all the moves until the end just came very easily.
Yeah.
Rook h3, queen h5, bishop e3. Yeah, these spike checks didn't scare
I was
you, I
thinking
assume.
bishop
right?
e3 first, but instead of queen takes d7.
Oh,
yeah.
Bishop e3 here.
Yeah, I still think it's winning. It's like queen takes e3, bishop takes d7, queen d3, f5, knight g6.
And there's ideas of rook h8 and knight e5.
If rook e8, that's
Rook h8.
let's say no, that doesn't work. Yeah, rook h8.
King
King
f7,
f7.
knight e5. These variations could get
And
tricky.
let's go back.
and-
Let's
yeah.
go. Here, I mean, I don't have to play knight g6.
Maybe you could go for
He
like
has
queen g3
counterplay.
and queen h4
Yeah, queen c5 is his counterplay.
with queen g1 ideas.
I only realized this resource later. Like at first, I didn't see this, but then I think here just b3. No, this queen g1, so he has counterplay.
So maybe this move on move 20, bishop e3 was his last chance.
Yeah,
If you
king
play king
b1, bishop takes f4.
With ideas of bishop h6.
Yeah, let's see if we can find something. Okay, yeah, I said. Oh yeah, I found something. I remember. Queen
Queen h5,
queen d3. I think.
queen d3.
Oh, he is. Probably f5 is the best move. Bishop h6, rook takes h6, takes queen g3, king h8, knight takes f.
Wait, slow down.
So, okay, sorry. So instead of f5, if he plays bishop h6, rook takes h6, g takes h6, queen g3, king h8, knight takes f7, rook takes f7, rook takes.
And if queen
queen
g8,
G8,
there's
queen
queen
E5.
e5. That's nice.
Let's go back.
So f5 would be the
f5 after queen d3.
it's after queen to d3. Seems very close for white. Sure, this is a position you'll go back home and check with the engines.
Okay, bishop e3.
If we go back even further.
Just back to bishop e3. Okay, so let's say I take on e3.
with queen. And we said bishop take d7.
There's
maybe not so easy, at least
okay,
to figure out right away.
It's not easy. Let's say I try rook h4, f6, I guess. Knight g6. That's rook e8, and it's not that.
Yeah, the king is finding some shelter.
So let's go back. There's after bishop takes d7. After at least there's something like rook g3. If g6, now I think like f5.
Oh wow, just busting open the whole position. And if e take f5?
Knight takes g6.
Knight takes g6, pawn takes g6.
King f7.
And white is down a rook and a bishop.
Queen h6.
Has some initiative, queen h6.
Bishop e6, huh? Yeah, this doesn't. Rook g7, king d8.
Yeah, sometimes when you sacrifice too much, you'll run out of ammunition. I don't want to spend too much energy calculating these variations. I know you have a big game tomorrow. If we just see how the game wrapped up, he played bishop e3, perhaps a bit later, which just went completely in your favor. Queen d1, did this surprise you at all?
No.
Or no, of course you just take it and queen returns to h5. So this puts you at 3 points out of 8 going into the last round. We do have to bring up that if you win tomorrow's game, you do get your final international master norm. And you're playing against the tournament leader, Hovhannes Gabuzian, who lost today. What are your thoughts about tomorrow? Are you excited? Are you nervous?
It's hard to say. Maybe more nervous, or I mean, I know he plays 3 or 4 different openings, so he's not necessarily the easiest opponent to prepare against. But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting game.
That's very true. And you have the black pieces. Will you be playing for a win, or are you just trying to play normal chess?
I guess play normal chess, find the best moves, and see what happens.
That's a very mature approach. So I will let you go rest and prepare, and best of luck tomorrow.
Thank you.
So we're going to go back with our coverage of the game still underway. I do want to look at the Akobian game because it seems like he's managed to unravel his pieces with getting his bishop and his rook centralized and holding on to the extra pawn. If we go back to where we last left after king f8, let's go back to, this position after bishop h3. This is a bit of a question what white had to do to make progress. Bishop g2 was played, bishop goes back to d7, bishop e4, bishop h3. Now we see Akobian's idea with pawn to d5. Perhaps just keeping the pawn defended. This is a passed pawn in the center. After bishop d7 back, now Akobian plays rook to e3. I'm a little bit confused here why black did not go for the immediate rook c3, given that it seems very logical to activate the rook. So we're going to have to keep an eye on this game because Akobian still has chances to fight for some of the top places. But I do want to welcome back Ben Simon to the studio. Any updates in any of the other games?
We have no results, but I think that a game we should look at is Darryl Spirits versus Alexander Lenderman, as Lenderman fights to stay in first place contention. It may not be looking too good for him. Darryl looks really aggressive as white over in Group A.
I'm trying to find that game. I'm struggling a little bit. Here we go. Okay. So yeah, Darryl Spirits I know has not been having the best event. Currently, is he tied for last place?
I think he's got 2 points. Yeah, so he's in clear last right now.
And Lenderman has had some rough games recently, just falling to Dreev yesterday, losing in just 23 moves with the white pieces. So perhaps both players trying to maybe finish strong after not the most desirable results. If we take a look at the current position, we see some nice sort of domination from white. I do admire white's position. I mean, white has a bishop pair. It seems like black is very much restricted. The bishops are piercing through black's position. This knight is completely pinned on d7, and there's this very nice outpost on b5, controlling more squares in black's territory, and really restricting, especially this dark squared bishop. Dark squared bishop would love to somehow trade itself off via d6 or via c7, but white is controlling both of these squares with the bishop and the knight. So the move that was played by Lenderman was knight to e8, which just looks like a very sad move. But it is perhaps fighting for control over these dark squares, and perhaps the idea is to eventually play a move like knight d6 or bishop d6, because when you're so low on space and there's still a lot of minor pieces on the board, it does make sense to try and trade and free yourself up. So one more move has been played, rook to e1, pressuring along the e-file. And I like this move by Darrow because it puts the question what to do with this bishop. I just mentioned that Lenderman would probably like to play a move like bishop d6, but this runs into some tactics, some removal of the guard tactics. Given the knight on e8 is defending the bishop, white could first remove the knight and then capture on d6 and go up a couple minor pieces for rook. This would be a very beneficial material imbalance for the white side. So rook e1 putting the question. Looks like another move has been played. Instead of moving the bishop forward, Lenderman played bishop to f8, moving backward, but trying to remain solid. And it seems like the next move, or black's next move, is knight to d6, trying to facilitate some trades. And now it's a question of whether white can sufficiently apply enough pressure to keep the advantage and keep the initiative in this position.
All right, very interesting game here so far between Spirits and Lenderman. Elsewhere in, let's see here. Yeah, Group B, Denis Boros is black versus Steven Zierk. Let's take a look at that one.
Yeah, this is actually a very crazy position. I'm not sure, not immediately sure who's better, but I do like black's setup, just with the two bishops versus the two knights, especially the battery along the light squares for black, this queen bishop battery, always eyeing this pawn on g2. We might expect a move from white soon to play something like f3 just to try and undermine the battery from black. But it was black's move here, and Boros did decide to go for some trades and captured on e4, perhaps liquidating the position. And after queen take e4, bishop take e4, lots of things are coming off the board. If we count the pawns, black is up a pawn, but there is some somewhat damaged structure given that these are two isolated double pawns in the center of the board. Now, speaking of pawns, black did decide to grab the undefended pawn on f2. And it seems like some trades are about to take place, but white does have some issues on the back rank, given that, okay, there's immediate threat of rook take d1 checkmate. If rook take d8, there would still be the threat of rook to d1. And it seems like white is a little bit slow here to regain the pawn deficit, given that, okay, rook d1 is still a threat. A move like g3 could be played. But black is temporarily up 2 pawns if they were to reach this position. And it seems like black is probably the one playing for a win. And we know that Denis had a nice win yesterday, so if he can win yet another game, it'll be a nice finish to the tournament for him.
Yes, no doubt about it. Do you think that, I mean, when will white actually be able to capture those two e-pawns? I mean, they're so vulnerable looking, but...
Well, we should go back to the current position.
Sure.
That is a good question, because it seems like after bishop take f2, white is now thinking in this position whether or not to trade rooks. I mean, white will probably win one or both of these pawns at some point, but as far as black strategy goes, it's a matter of slowing white down and keeping the initiative. We could see a move like rook f1. This is another candidate move, just to attack the bishop on f2. Now I'm realizing there might be some kind of fancy tricks for black in the position. Black could leave the bishop undefended because, keep in mind, there would still be rook to d1 possibilities if the bishop were to be captured. And there would be a nice move here for black, rook to d4. Just pressuring the knight on c4, the rook on e4. White would have no time to take on e5. And if rook take d4, then bishop can just recapture. And black would be holding on to the e-pawn for perhaps much longer, because if rook to e1, there would be rook f8. Always eyeing the back rank, and also planning rook to f5. So this did not occur in the game. Instead of rook to f1, Zierk played this move rook to b1, which actually looks like a nicer move. This attacks the b4 pawn, and now white is threatening to take it with check. And the e-pawn is still hanging, so it looks like white will be winning back perhaps both pawns relatively soon. And then it'll be a question who will be the player playing for a win if material does equalize.
Okay. Eric, we've had a lot of fun so far on this show, but this middle pumpkin is rotten, man, and it's really starting to stink. So
there is some mold. Yeah, I'm seeing it too.
It's really beyond. There's no return for this.
I mean, it might be easier to carve. Like, we could even carve it with like a butter knife at this point. But
yeah, well, I was thinking more along the lines of just putting it outside. So
give it to the rats.
Oh, hey, look, we have some replacements though. It's okay.
Well, speaking of replacements.
I
don't think we need any virtual pumpkin. We're
No.
the remaining one. And this is a pumpkin bought a few days ago. I think that's much more of a minimalist approach, given we don't need all these.
How many pumpkins you got under there?
There's a lot more that we'll have to save for future shows. But
okay.
I think we're good just using this guy for the time being.
It's fresh. Get us through tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Here we go. All right, one of the important games in Group A, Eric Hansen versus Lazaro Bruzon, two of the leaders, 4 points apiece. And this is a very important game. Let's see if either one of these players can emerge from this round in a really good position.
Yeah, let's take a look. First thing we should note is Eric is on move, and he's running low on time. He has under 4 minutes left. Bruzon has left the table for the time being. Now, if we count material, Eric is down a pawn. Black has an additional pawn on the queen side, but these are double pawns, perhaps reminiscent of the game that we just saw. And there's very beautiful knights on d4, blockading the double pawns. It seems like white is the one pushing for some sort of positional advantage here, despite being down a pawn. But it is a question what to do next, because for the time being, black seems to have everything under control. We could imagine some move like queen take a5. This is a one pawn, which is not defended in the position. We see Eric, hand on his head, who's about to make a move, but seems a little bit hesitant. Now he's just frozen in that pose. Queen take a5 looks to be played. So material is now balanced. Now there is one glaring weakness in white's position. It's this e4 square, which I'm not actually sure if black can exploit right away. This would be a beautiful outpost for the black knight. The only issue is that if knight e4 is played instantly, then d5 would hang, and Eric would be quite happy. So that was not played. I'm trying to make out what was played in that position. Looks like rook e8 was played, and then very quickly Hansen dropped his knight back to c2, defending the rook on e3. Still seems like a dogfight. It's imbalanced enough due to the structure, also due to the fact that white is very extended on the king side with these pawns, not really protecting the white king. So you always have to be careful when queens are still on the board and your king is running low on shelter. that there's no immediate attack that the opponent could try and unleash. Now I'm imagining something like rook take e3, knight take e3, and then something like queen to e6, where the knight's attacked, the pawn on d5 is defended, and if the knight moves anywhere, then the queen can come in either to e2 or e1. So this could be an interesting line for black, and it is a forcing line too. I'm sure Rosen is pondering this position and maybe thinking how white could best save himself. Might have to play a move like knight to g2, but this would look quite ugly as the queen could still infiltrate. There would be ideas of knight e4. Seems like white's queen is a bit out of play in a lot of these lines, where if black can start coordinating the queen and his own knight, then there could potentially be some more worries for the white king. Sometimes in chess, the queen plus knight combination is one of the most deadly mating combinations between any two pieces.
You know, another game where the pieces are coordinating quite well, they are the pieces of Sethuraman over, it's still here in Group A. Hammer versus Sethuraman. Hammer's king looks a little unsafe right now.
Looks very, very shaky on g1. Even though, okay, there is some pawn shelter, black is making use of the dark square control with the rook very nicely planted on g3. And yeah, just speaking of piece coordination, we can see that the knight is very much ready to come in via g5. In fact, that was played, knight to g5. Now with just the winning threat of knight h3, taking advantage of the pin along the g-file, this would fork the white queen and the king. So it looks like Hammer quickly played queen e2, and it's still a question, how does Sethuraman break through in this position? I mean, he has literally all of his pieces on the king's side. They look very, very menacing, but for the time being, it's still a question. So knight h3 would be a check, but then the white king could start running, and I don't see anything immediate for black in this position. So sometimes it's a question how to make progress when it seems like your pieces are fully optimized.
I mean, is there a way? Because I really don't see one either.
It seems like the queen is actually a bit stuck on
Right.
h4. It would be very nice for black if the queen and the pawn could just switch places. If the queen was on h5, the pawn was on h4, black would really like to get in this pawn break with h3 just to destabilize the base of white's pawn chain. But this isn't so easy to achieve, and the queen would have to perhaps untangle itself because the rook and the knight are blocking any sort of escape squares. Maybe we could imagine a move like queen to h3, again taking advantage of this pin, and also tying down the white queen to defending g2, given that the queen moves away from defending g2, it we mate for black. And this would allow the pawn to advance one square further, and then maybe we'll see the queen escape via this diagonal, maybe queen e6, and then we can see pawn h3. So this is really the first attractive idea that comes to mind for the black side. And I mean, for the time being, white seems just completely stuck. I mean, this bishop on a3 is so depressing. There's no immediate counterplay against the black king. I mean, there's always shelter for the black king on a square like h7, so I don't think rook d8 would be too threatening. So if I had to put my money on it, I would predict queen h3 in this position. And for anyone watching online, this is sometimes an exercise that I like to encourage students to do, is when you put yourself in the position of a strong player and just try and predict their next move. Without any help of the engine, without any sort of external help, you just try and predict what they do, and then see if you can play like them, or if their ideas completely outperform your ideas. So it's sometimes instructive exercise watching situations like this.
And by the way, you can do that at uschesschamps.com. You'll notice by default the Chess24 module on that website has the evaluation meter turned on. You can turn that off. in the settings. So it's still a great place to watch the games, and no spoilers, so to speak.
It's very true.
Let's take a look at Sergei Azarov versus Brandon Jacobson over in Group B. Brandon Jacobson, a player that we're quite familiar with at this point, one of the two youngest in the field. Azarov, we still don't know too much about him. What do you make of this position so far?
That's a good point. I think, actually I want to go back. I want to actually go back to the very beginning of this game. This is a game that caught my eye earlier as being a very, very theoretical variation of the Sicilian. And going forward here, they went into what we call the Sveshnikov variation. This is a very old line named after a player, Evgeny Sveshnikov, who I actually played a couple years ago in Latvia. This is a incredibly theoretical line. Lots of books have been written about this specific position after pawn to e5, and it seemed like Jacobson was very well prepared in the opening. I noticed before the broadcast began, he was just blitzing out his moves, and by move like 20 to 25, he had more time than he started with due to the increment. And I want to zoom forward because all of this has been played before. And I want to get to the point around here. Queen g3, queen h6, and then queen e3, queen h4, and then g3. Let me get to this position. So earlier when I was looking at this, I was looking at it on leechess.org, where they have the opening explorer, where you can see basically any specific position and how many times it's been played before. This position has been played a handful of times before, and it's been played by none other than Sergei Azarov. Has had this position back 10 years ago in 2008, and the game ended in a draw. I believe he was playing Spasov in that game, another grandmaster. And in that game, Sergei's opponent played queen to h3. In this game, Jacobson played queen g4. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jacobson had perhaps seen that game that Azarov has played 10 years ago and perhaps used it in preparing for this game and maybe prepared a specific position. So just based on the opening preparation, I like the way that Jacobson has handled himself so far. Going forward here, several more moves have been played, and let's zoom quickly to the current position, because even though Jacobson moved quickly in the opening, he is running low on time now. His clock has fallen below 1 minute, and after bishop to d5, it's his move. I mean, just an immediate evaluation, I would have to prefer white here, even with black having the bishop pair. Seems like white has simply better structure. I mean, just 2 pawn islands, one pawn island on the queen side, 1 pawn island on the king side. No real pawn weaknesses to speak of. And meanwhile, black's structure is more of an archipelago, just pawns scattered all over the place. There are 3 isolated pawns, all of which are potentially weak. And this knight is very well placed. It's an outpost blockading this pawn on f5, fixing it on a light square. So it seems like Azarov has some nice positional pull to potentially grind down the youngster Brandon Jacobson.
And Jacobson's rook on e1, it looks like it's in a good spot, but it's not really in position to do anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, what to do with this rook? It needs some.
I feel like I'd be able to pick off some pawns, but there's.
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty, but I think this is what we call a decoration. It doesn't really contribute much value to anything, really, much like this pumpkin. So I would think the rook is just going to stay there for a bit of time. I did not mean to insult the pumpkin, by the way, but
it's okay. Let's move on.
Give it some sympathy taps. Bishop d7 was played, and now Azarov is thinking, looks like, update the board here, because it's still a question, okay, how does white perhaps target black's weaknesses? Because, okay, the pawn on f5 is well defended, pawn on d6 is also well defended, so it will take some work for white to try and make progress in this position. One move that sticks out is knight to e3, just to attack the rook on e1, attack the bishop on e5. That's not what was played, though. Azarov chose perhaps a very slow, subtle pawn a3. just giving black a choice what to do in this position. Doesn't seem like the most the most threatening move, but it does keep everything very solid. Now, okay, all of the queenside pawns are very well defended. Jacobson quickly played rook to c8, putting the ball back in Azarev's court. I like rook c8, nice control over this open file, and maybe we'll see this these pawns on the queen side, even though they're a minority, there's 2 on 3 from black's perspective. Maybe black would like to go for some minority attack and go for pawn b4. It's always interesting when it's a 2 on 3 imbalance on one side of the board. Sometimes the 2 pawns are better at creating weaknesses within the structure of 3 pawns. And a move like b4 could allow this rook to enter via c1, and then maybe the rook on e1 wouldn't be so much of a decoration, given that if the rooks are doubled up, there'd be some counterplay against the white king.
All right, very nice. It's been a while since we've looked at our key matchup in Group A, Alexei Dreev versus Ray Robson. Let's check back in on that game. I don't think much has changed, but it is a very important matchup in this round.
Yeah, we still see the bishop versus knight imbalance. If we go back a few moves, let's see how play is developing. It seemed like Dreev is looking to push on the side where he has a majority. 3 on 2, should note. And I mean, the goal for white in a position like this is to somehow create a passed pawn and create a situation where, okay, the passed pawn could be dangerous, and then maybe use it as a decoy to focus on the other side of the board. So after pawn f3, knight to e7, just seems like black is just very solid, and white could try and create the passed pawn with a move like pawn h5, which looks like Dreev played the move. I believe pawn h5 was played. Don't know if you can make out there what was played. King e4 was played, perhaps anticipating knight d5 as it would come attacking f4. But anytime white does go for this h5 break, it could leave white with a weakness. Black could capture it, and after pawn takes back on h5, white would then have a couple of isolated pawns, and the knight would be in decent position to defend on the king side, perhaps with a move like knight f5. So it seems like Dreev is taking his time here, not going for any immediate pawn push, but just trying to maybe move around and wait for when the opportunity does present itself. We might also see white go for a move like f4, and maybe when the time is right, either go for f5 or h5. We had Dreev in the studio yesterday, and he mentioned he's in the process of writing a book on endgames. So I'm wondering if going through that process of writing a book like that could maybe help him in a situation like this.
Maybe so. I have a question, though. Is it an option for Dreev to take the king over to the queen side and harass the A and B pawns?
That's a very legitimate question. I mean, king d4 and king c5 was not an idea that I mentioned, but it's very real because I mean, these pawns, if the b5 pawn is attacked, the knight is not currently in good shape to defend it. And we do see with Ray's last move, knight to c6, he is restricting king to d4. And even if white wanted to maybe bring the king to c5, there's no clear way to do so. I see a very strange move by Dreev here. Bishop to a1. What is this? It's putting the bishop in the corner. Maybe just a waiting move. Yeah. Maybe putting the question what to do for black, because now if the knight moves, then the king could potentially infiltrate. And meanwhile, if the knight can't move, then black has to make some other commitment. If the king moves towards the center, maybe then we'll see pawn h5.
Well, Robson played king g8. Is that a waiting move as well?
King g8 looks like a waiting move. Let me update the board here. Bishop a1, king g8. Maybe some confusing moves here, but looks like both players are waiting. It seems like Ray seems pretty comfortable after, especially after seeing bishop a1. I mean, he played king g8 fairly quickly, perhaps realizing the situation, that it's hard for white to actually make progress given black's setup. I do want to mention here that black has some very nice coordination between the knight and the pawns, especially the knight controlling these dark squares and the pawns controlling the light squares. There's actually no way for the white king to effectively enter black's territory. Essentially, all of these blue squares are acting as a wall, restricting the white king, and there's no clear path to get to the c5 square, which is something that white would dream of. Meanwhile, if king f4 is played, maybe trying to enter via g5, looks like black could just keep waiting with a move like king f7, and just posing the question to how white is continuing here. So I wouldn't be surprised if this game ends in a draw, perhaps somewhat soon.
Right, yeah, that looks likely. And elsewhere in Group A, it appears that, well, I want to see if you think that Eric Hansen is as uncomfortable as I think he is right now in his game against Bruzone.
And we should note this is a key matchup for the standings. If Bruzone wins this game and Dreev draws, there is a chance for Bruzone to catch up in the final round. Yeah, this is looking very uncomfortable for the chess bra. Backing up just a few moves, we see that, yeah, white is probably regretting overextending on the king side, and black is just entering the territory, winning a pawn on a4 after king to h2, now rook to c4. Seems like white's position is just falling apart, and the time situation can't be helping white either, given that Eric is below a minute on the clock. And okay, black's still over 3 minutes for the time being. They do have four more moves left to make move 40. We see an aggressive move by white, pawn g5. But this seems like sort of a desperate attempt, given that, okay, this is also weakening white's king side further, and now the knight could perhaps jump into h5, and now this f4 pawn is going to be a target. Instead, h take g5 was played. I would expect white to recapture with f take g5, and then we still might see knight h5. And this f4 square just looks very, very juicy for black. The knight can enter f4, or the rook can enter f4. And yeah, seems like white, especially with these pieces kind of lined up on the second rank, not the most energetic placement. And the knight on c2 is perhaps a liability for white, as the queen and the rook are tied down to defending it. So it looks like Bruzone is thinking here, perhaps considering knight h5, maybe considering something else. The other candidate move to look at is knight to e4, way more direct. In this case, black, would be attacking the queen, also pressuring the pawn on g5. And we might see a situation where the queen will be overworked, given that the queen is currently somewhat tied down to both the knight on c2 and the pawn on g5. Of course, the queen would have to save itself. But Bruzone did not go for this. Instead, Bruzone played perhaps a slower maneuvering move, but a very logical move, knight to d7. It's interesting, I was only looking at the forward knight moves. Bruzone chose the backward knight move, but with the intention of moving forward. And now we can see the knight has kind of a beautiful central outpost square on e5, where it would be very stable, supported by the d6 pawn. And from e5, black would then have access to f3, and the knight will also be helping cover some squares on the king side. So I do like this move by black, and it seems like black has a lot of winning chances going forward from this position.
Another game that has just seen, actually, a knight moving backward is over in Group B between Ashwin and Mora Diabati. White has just brought his knight back to D1, I suppose repositioning it. Have we looked at this game yet, Eric?
I don't believe we have.
I think this is the last one that we have not seen.
I'm just trying to refresh myself. I was looking at this game before the broadcast, but it's a game we perhaps overlooked just because it was a bit more positional, very calm in nature. And getting to the point that you're talking about here, after rook take b4 and rook to a2, black is actually down 2 pawns, but has a lot of initiative with these rooks on the half-open v-file, targeting the pawn on b2. And the only way for white to defend the pawn here is this somewhat depressing move, knight to d1. But this does kind of keep everything held together. And we should note this is move 40, so both players have gained the extra half hour on the clock. One more move has been played, rook to a4. Attempting to still try and win back the pawn, we can imagine that if white takes back on a4, the bishop can recapture. Both players standing up there. Okay, Ashwin now sitting back down. Always nice when you reach move 40, you can take that coffee break or the bathroom break or the snack break. I know the players have a lot of snacks to choose from in the kitchen area.
Oh, yeah.
So Ashwin, maybe realizing the situation after rook a4 is played, I think he'll have to capture, and then there will be a situation where the knight's attacked, and the knight is tied down to defending b2. So it looks like black will be guaranteed to win back at least one pawn. And if the knight moves, let's say to e3, then rook take b2, king g1. And okay, white is still probably playing for a win, despite the suboptimal pawn structure. In a situation like this, when the pawns are in close proximity, the knight is actually performing better than the bishop, just because the bishop can't really utilize its long-range capabilities, as play is mainly focused in the center. And we can imagine that the knight, okay, is looking to go to a square like c4, maybe eventually e5. Also, there's ideas for white to play g4, and if the pawns get traded, then white would be left with a passed pawn on the g-file. So it seems like Ashwin is the one playing for a win here. And this game is important for the standings, right?
Both players are at 4 points. And, you know, in Group B going into today, Gabuzian could have clinched it. That has not happened. So these guys are still in it. Look, Gabuzian's still far and away the favorite to win this whole thing tomorrow. But this is a very important game. Either of these players could find themselves in a very good position tomorrow.
Right, and Gabuzian would only need a draw tomorrow against Christopher Yu to clinch it. But
Yes.
with this dynamic of Christopher,
And they've just ended the
for
game.
Norm.
They've just shaken hands.
Oh, so they drew.
That looks to be the case.
Does that mean Gabuzian has clinched it, even though he lost today? Because the only other player that could have caught Gabuzian was Conrad Holt, who had 4 points, and he went down pretty hard against Christopher Yu.
I think you might be right. Yeah. Hafanas Gabuzian with this draw is the Group B champion.
He is Group B champion, yeah. It's incredible he lost today, but
Well, there we go. I mean,
still wins the $4,000. Wow.
We'll have to talk to him at least one more time. If not today, then tomorrow. I mean, but look, his game tomorrow is still super important against Chris Yu. Chris Yu could be the storybook finish of Group B if things go his way. He says that Gabuzian is not the easiest player to prepare for, and well, that much is obvious. Gabuzian came in the highest rated player, the #1 seed, and now he's going to leave with $4,000 in his pocket. So that's amazing
Still
stuff.
amazing tournaments. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's always tough to maybe stumble towards the finish line, but it's really got to be happy with this play, taking down a number of very strong players in this group.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Thank you to Isaac for letting me know that was it. I really had just written the clinching off of my mind, but it was still a possibility. Okay, so while Group B is determined, there's still a lot more action going on. There is another result, actually, in Group A. We saw the tale of the trapped king in the corner with Hammer and Sethuraman. Well, that game has been drawn. Hammer had Sethuraman on the ropes as far as his king in the corner, and they just repeated because there was no way to break through Black's wall there, as you can see.
I'm actually very surprised, given I thought Black had a very nice advantage, but maybe he wasn't able to find the right breakthrough. If we see what happens, knight h3 was played, and then he moves the rook back to g6. Interesting idea that didn't really consider. This does leave the knight undefended on h3, but if white were to take it, we can imagine that queen takes on h3, king e1, queen h1, and then the rook is bound to come in to g2 or g1, depending where white moves, and black will be winning the queen. For example, king d2, rook g2. So the knight could not be taken on h3. Rather, white played pawn b5, and after queen g3, rook d8, king h7, rook d5, and this is the beginning of where we're going to see the repetition. White is threatening the pawn on h5. Black played king to h6, and then white plays rook to d8, threatening rook h8. And I guess Sethuraman saw nothing better than to just go back to h7. After rook d5, king h6, the players just repeated moves and agreed to a draw. That's surprising for me, because I really thought Black had some very nice pressure in the position, but I guess wasn't quite enough to break through.
Indeed. I am looking right now back at Daro Spirits versus Alexander Lenderman in Group A. This is one of the most confusing games to glance at initially, but it looks like Daro is still very comfortable.
Yeah, we saw earlier with Daro just having very nice domination in the position. Looks like the players have passed move 40. They're on move 41 right now. If we go back to where we last left, we saw this bishop f8 move, very passive, but holding things together. Rook to b1 was played, perhaps trying to maybe focus on doubling up on the e-file, connecting the rooks to later have some more central focus. Rook d8 was played, and now bishop to c2. I like this maneuver, bishop c2, getting ready to form this battery along the b1 h7 diagonal. It's always nice when you can have your queen leading the battery, and that's what we see. White is planning in this position. If queen d3 is played, there will be looming mating threats against h7 square. So knight to b6 is played, and now pawn h4 seems like Daro launching a kingside attack after pawn g6, pawn h5. White is trying to perhaps destabilize this pawn shelter that Black has in place. This provoked Lenderman to advance forward with pawn g5, and White ignores the attack on the bishop and goes for queen to d3, threatening the very simple mate in one. Looked like Black only had one defense in this position, knight to f6. And now the bishop enters the position, bishop to c7. Very aggressive move, targeting the rook on d8, pressuring the knight on b6. The bishop, we should mention, is well supported by this nice outpost knight on b5. So rook to e8 was played, and now the bishop goes back to e5. Really admire the piece harmony, the piece coordination by White in this position. It seems like the two bishops are just so effective in staring down at the Black king side, especially given that Black is overextended with these pawns on h6 and g5. Going for just a couple more moves, knight to b7, knight bd7, king g2, and rook to e6. Looks like one more move has been played, bishop to g3. And for the time being, White is not actually crashing through. Black has the key squares on the king side defended. I would still prefer White in this position, but I would imagine that it could be somewhat of still a long fight. I do want to note that after bishop to g3 is played, White might be having some ideas of knight c7. The reason why White, I don't think, can play knight c7 right away is because knight take e5 would remove the guard of the knight, and also attacking the queen. Then the knight would be left undefended on c7. So bishop g3 does get the bishop to safety. And now knight c7 is a threat. And it's a question, how does black deal with this? Because it seems like if rook take e1, then white is just happy to take over the e-file. And would like to show one line, if rook take e1, and rook to e8. This would be a tragic blunder for black, given that now the knight is overworked on f6, defending just too many things at once, defending the rook and defending the h7 square. White could simply take on e8 and then deliver the mate on h7. So I like the simple move. Bishop to g3, keeping the pressure, having some threat. Lenderman still managing his time perhaps a bit better than his opponent, but yeah, we'll have to see what happens. I do still like white's chances in this position.
All right, very well. Let's glance back as we get to the end of our broadcast portion of the show. Well, we have to stay on until we know that Group A will not be clinched today. So
that's true, and that's going to come down
right.
to the fight between Dreev and Robson, and they're still battling it out.
Yeah, it looks pretty drawn here. I mean, so I think there was a capture. Yeah, pawn capture on f5.
Yeah, because the last time we saw, they were just kind of being very patient, right, making some waiting moves, maybe just trying to reach move 40. And we see, okay, bishop b2, king f7. So Ray was probably just happy with a draw. But Dreev is the one pushing. He does play f4, turns down the repetition. Ray just keeps waiting, very patient, king g8, and now pawn f5. Finally, a pawn break. We do see some trades, e take f5, g take f5. And now we see Ray is thinking in this position. He has a time added. They're on move 41. So he's already actually taken 10 minutes here to ponder his next move. I mean, the easy choice just seems like taking on f5, and after king take f5, I would just be inclined to put the king on h7 and ask how white is making progress in this position. Maybe Ray is just making sure, perhaps calculating some lines where white's king could then potentially walk in to the queen side. Maybe there's still some annoying pull. There are situations in chess where a bishop and a rook pawn would be drawn. However, in this case, if white is somehow able to win the knight and trade off all of the pawns on the queen side, this bishop and h-pawn combination would be winning because the queening square is a dark square. So I'm trying to imagine what Ray is deciding between in this position. Maybe he's thinking about king f7, just a simple move to defend the pawn in g6, and then we could potentially see a very similar line if pawn takes g6, king takes g6, and then king d5. It's also very possible. It's a bit awkward for black because the knight is getting kicked around a little bit. It's restricted by the bishop on b2, pawn on e3 is well placed, and if the knight has to move backwards, like knight to e7, then white can start picking up some pawns, and then maybe it's not so easy, given that if a move like b4 is played, then there's a4. And if white can hold on to the a-pawn and win both of black's queenside pawns, then there's an additional problem on the king side. This could be hard to defend.
Well, wouldn't that just be winning for white?
So this position?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's completely winning. I would actually think that there should somehow be a way for black to still draw. For example, a move like king to h5. Because it still takes a lot of time for white to win both of these pawns and then start queening the a-pawn. And if a move like king b5 is played, I think the knight could somehow hop in and slow down white's operation. For example, a move like knight d5. And if king take a5, there would even be a move like knight to c3. And all black would need to do is sacrifice the knight for the a-pawn. and then end up winning the h-pawn, then white would be out of pawns. For example, if king take b4, knight take a4, king take a4, this is just a draw. So I think Ray should have everything under control with precise play. But I'm sure Ray is having flashbacks. He had a game earlier this tournament against Lazaro Bruzon, which we actually didn't get to cover on the broadcast because it just went so long. It was, I think, a game that lasted over 5.5 hours. And it was a game that Ray was, I think, over pushing. It was a situation with knight versus bishop. He had the knights. He was pushing for a win, ended up over pushing and lost some sort of similar endgame where there was some kind of pawn race. So I'm sure he doesn't want to perhaps let another game in sort of a similar endgame situation slip like that one did. So he's okay. He's a professional player. He's taking his time, just perhaps deciding what option is the most clear. And I'm sure he's very deep in calculation. You can see it in his posture there, just leaning over the board. And when he feels confident, I'm sure he's going to make his move.
While we're waiting for those moves to be made, I would like to talk about some big upcoming events here at the St. Louis Chess Club and abroad. You know, we have just the best commentary teams in the world as far as this Royal game goes. So this Fall Classic is one of a series, and the next one coming up is the Winter Classic. It's 2 10-player round robins, same format, everything is the same, just different players. You're going to see some familiar names, you're going to see some names you've never seen before. That begins November 5 on uschesschamps.com. And actually it will be, we will have Jesse Cry in here for the analysis of that big event. That should be a lot of fun. After the Winter Classic, we have a norm event called the St. Louis Invitational. 2 10-player round robins, as are these tournaments, $15,000 prize fund, plus the possibility of norms. We will have a Grandmaster Norm section, and we will have an International Master Norm section. That begins November 16 at uschesschamps.com. And Eric, actually, you were talking before about your experience as a gatekeeper in an International Master Norm event.
Well, yeah, I've played a few of these before, and I've been on kind of both sides of the aisle. I've been an International Master in an IM Norm event where I'm sort of the target, the target is on my head. But I've also been the one trying to strive to get the norms. And there's a lot on the line for these events because, especially for the younger players, if they can perform well and get a norm or get their titles, it just leads to a lot more opportunities in international events.
And that tournament is at uschesschamps.com. We'll see who the stars of tomorrow in the chess world are at the St. Louis Invitational. And then abroad, in London, it's the World Chess Championship, but right here in St. Louis, we've got you covered on abbreviated commentary every day that there is a game in that match, starting November 9 with Yasser, Jen, and Maurice. You can find out more at stlouischessclub.org as we approach the World Chess Championship. Now, they will be talking about more than just the World Match Championship. They will also have the World Women's Chess Championship with Today in Chess. That's the name of the program, as Ju Wen-jun defends her title in a 64-player knockout event. And, of course, the people in the USA will be cheering on our own Irina Krush and Sabina Foiser, 2 former women's U.S. champions. And then finally, we close out the year, our last big broadcast. It's the 2018 Grand Chess Tour Finals at the London Chess Classic. This will be a combination of classical, rapid, and blitz games. It's a miniature knockout, 4-player knockout between Fabiano Caruana and Hikaru Nakamura. They'll meet in a match in the first round. And on the other side of the bracket will be Levon Aronian and MVL. And then the winners of those 2 matches will clash for the Tour Championship. I mean, if the World Chess Championship, the match championship, is not your thing, some people think it's antiquated, this is your World Championship. You know, like it's going to be a really big event in London, a huge month in London, and very excited to bring the action here from St. Louis.
Do you have a pick for Grand Chess Tour champion?
I think Fabiano Caruana can do both, the World Championship and the London event.
That would be incredibly impressive. I don't know if that's likely, but...
Well, of course it's not likely to win both. I mean, that's a huge parlay.
I have to pick Nakamura. I think he is he's by far the best in that field in Blitz and Rapid, and I think the universal rating system has him still at number 2.
Yeah, Hikaru Nakamura. So the universal rating system, which rates games across all time controls, going all the way down from 5-minute Blitz to Classical, and from the rating system's inception in the summer of 2016, Magnus Carlsen, number 1, Hikaru Nakamura, number 2. Now, everything else has switched, but those two have been very consistent. So when you incorporate quicker chess, Hikaru Nakamura, world number 2, universal rating system. I think Caruana in the URS is he's in the top 10. I think he might be number 6 right now.
Fair enough. I know he's not at the same elite level in Blitz as Carlsen or Naka, but still, of course, incredible in classical chess.
Right. If you want to know more about the universal rating system, by the way, ELO has no bearing on it. It's not an average of ratings. It's its own rating system. You should check out more information at universalrating.com. And if you have a FIDE rating, search your name. You might have a universal rating you didn't know about. Okay, so we are getting down to the nitty-gritty here in Hansen versus Bruzone, which is now definitely one of the games to watch in Group A. We're really just keeping an eye on these Group A games mostly as we close out round 8.
Absolutely, and seems like Hansen's position is getting worse and worse and worse. When we last left, we saw this very nice, kind of patient knight d7 move heading to e5, and as it plays out, the knight lands on e5. Now, we should note that the rook is being left undefended or just attacked by the knight in this position. But if white were to capture on c4, then black would have just a very simple fork, knight to f3, losing the queen. So knight e5 did come with tempo, forces white to defend this f3 square somehow. Rook to f2 was played, and then rook to d4, just keeping initiative. I really like the coordination by Bruzone in this position, having this nice battery along the 4th rank, combining the queen and rook, and now targeting the white queen on d2, also taking control over this d3 square. We might imagine someday a knight or a rook landing on d3 just to further increase the pressure. So queen c2 was played, and now queen to b4. Interesting move. Might be some tactics associated with this move. I'm imagining that black might be perhaps daydreaming of knight f3, and if rook take f3, there would be rook to d2. So the queen is a bit more useful on b4, not only controlling d2, but also pressuring b2. So it just seems like white is really tied down here. It seems like a very difficult position not to allow any sort of tactical possibilities from the black pieces. Now, Hansen did play a move here, king to g2, perhaps improving the king. And this is actually a common sort of defensive idea in chess. Might be weird to think about, but whenever the opponent's knight is on a dark square, sometimes it's better to have your king on the light square. So whenever the knight moves, knight won't be attacking any light square. So there's no immediate checks by the black knight, and for the time being, white does have this f3 square under control, but the position just seems so weak for white. I mean, all the pawns just scattered all over the place, and black having such nice piece harmony. Looks like Bruzone just played a move there, wrote down on his score sheet, and then went back to his classic thinking pose. I'm being told rook d3 was played. It just seems like yet another just pressurizing move, this time trying to exploit the 3rd rank. And just based on posture, Hansen looks somewhat defeated, just leaning back, perhaps realizing his doom. Knight on e3 is attacked, and when the rook moves away off the 4th rank, it opens up the queen to come into e4. So we can imagine queen e4 very soon to come. And if knight g4 is played, knight g4, just knight takes g4, and white's just completely falling apart. So the immediate question is, how does white deal with this simple attack against e3? And there we have it, just Hansen resigns. Nice victory from Rosen with the black pieces. He played a Berlin in this game, which is usually known to be somewhat of a drawish opening, but perhaps Hansen overpushed. We saw the kingside pawns just made a bit too far of a journey down on the king side, and ouch, Hansen just looking very defeated there.
And quite significant to our dinner times, what that means is that Rosen is at 5 points out of 8, and even if Dreev wins, it will still be just a point difference. So this field will not be decided today, and it will be decided tomorrow. And remember, tomorrow, playoffs if necessary. There will be no dual winners here. There will be no shared title. There is only going to be one winner of the Fall Classic Group A.
So who can still win? Rosen, Dreev, and maybe Akobian?
Well, I think it's... okay, so as of right now, Dreev, Rosen...
I guess Akobian needs to win his game today to be in that group.
I think actually... What about Hansen? Can Hansen still do it?
Well, Hansen just lost.
Yeah, but...
So it might take some time for the Chess 24 standings to update.
Right. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I think yeah, we'd have to look at the last round here. Okay, so here are the standings so far for Group A. We see Dreev and Rosen at the top. Now, keep in mind, 3 of the games have not finished. Well, all we know, basically, is that this field will not be wrapped up today. What about Kuzubov? Right?
Yuri Kuzubov, yeah, that's true.
Okay, get up to 4.5. I mean, you've got to, even if it's far-fetched, you know, you've got to add the point to prospective players whose games have not finished.
That's very true. I mean, we're expecting Dreev to draw, so
right.
That would put him at 5.5, and then, I mean, Rosen, if Akobian manages to win, I think they would be the 2 most likely players to catch up.
Yeah, well, this could be a really exciting day, actually, tomorrow that we have.
Especially in Group B, too, with this matchup between Christopher Yu against Akobian.
Yeah, I mean, here's Group B's standings, and we know that Hovannes Gabuzian has clinched the first place prize. He will leave with $4,000. But the game tomorrow between he and Christopher Yu, it's you know, in Japan they used to have these mixed martial arts matches where they have the 500-pound guy versus the lightweight, and it was just like a monster movie. That's kind of what I think about in here. You have the top seed versus the bottom seed. You have not only the top seed, the champion he has the white pieces. But if black wins, if Chris Yu wins, then you have the Cinderella Norm story.
We might have to bring back our tiny pumpkin to complete the metaphor.
Absolutely. Well, I think that will do it for today as we get really pumped up for tomorrow. And, whoa, hey, look at all those pumpkins. They're there, right? It's digital.
They're still there, yeah. Virtual and real life.
Yeah. You know, if these pumpkins aren't careful, they'll have their jobs taken by the digital ones.
Don't want that to happen.
It's 2018. Progress. Okay, so let's move on. This show was produced by the world's greatest production B team. Tammy Hyde was the streamer. Isaac Schranz is your graphics and audio man, and our technical director is Danny Machuca. Tomorrow, remember, everything starts early. The games begin at 11 a.m. Central Time, and you can watch them immediately as they start at uschesschamps.com. Our broadcast will be on the air 2.5 hours after the round begins at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. So we look forward to seeing all of you for our last day of play. It's going to be a good one at the Fall Chess Classic. For International Master Eric Rosen, my name is Ben Simon. And until tomorrow, we say so long from the Show Me State.